4:14 a.m. International waters. Cay Sal Bank corridor, 41 nautical miles northwest of Andros Island, Bahamas. The USCG cutter Mohawk cut its running lights. Engines dropped to near idle. On the foredeck, an 8-man FBI hostage rescue team element checked their gear in silence. No radio chatter. No flashlights. The target vessel sat 300 meters ahead. A 64-foot motor yacht. Navigation lights on. Barely moving. 17 days had passed since 6 Americans walked onto a fishing charter in the Florida Keys and disappeared. The yacht was called the Solara Venture. On paper, it was registered to a shell company in Nassau. In practice, it had been running slow circles through the Cay Sal corridor for 2 weeks, burning through premium diesel at a rate no recreational trip could justify. Somewhere inside it, below the aft deck behind a watertight door, 6 people were waiting in the dark. This is what happened. All of it. October 9th, 2025. Marathon, Florida Keys. 6:40 a.m. The marina at Boot Key Harbor came alive early that morning. Charter boats fueling up. Deckhands loading coolers. The usual pre-dawn routine of a working Gulf port. Among the vessels scheduled out that day was the Real Promise. A 41-foot center console fishing charter, white hull, twin outboards, flying the Florida Keys Sport Fishing Association pennant it had earned 3 decades running. The Real Promise belonged to the Callahan family. Martin Callahan, 61, had built the business from a single leased vessel in 1994. By 2025, the operation ran 2 boats under 3 captains, all with a near-perfect safety record across 31 years of deep-water charters out of Marathon. The family name was on the boat. The family reputation was on every trip. That morning's party was 6 clients. 3 retired couples, all from the Southwest Florida corridor, Naples and Sarasota, ages ranging from 47 to 68. All experienced offshore anglers. 2 of the couples had chartered the Real Promise before. This was familiar, deep water fishing at the southwest rim of the Florida Keys, out and back in a single day, home by 6 p.m. They checked in at the dock at 6:40 a.m. Captain Dennis Whitmore, 44, logged them in by name. He noted the weather briefing, winds at 8 to 12 knots, 2-foot swells, visibility unlimited. Ideal conditions. He filed his float plan with Marathon Coast Guard Station at 7 o'clock. Departure logged at 7:15 a.m. By 9 p.m. that night, the Real Promise had not returned. No radio contact since a routine check-in at 8:52 a.m. No emergency locator beacon activation. The vessel's AIS transponder, its automatic identification system, which broadcasts position continuously, had gone dark at 9:04 a.m., approximately 47 nautical miles southwest of Marathon. At 9:30 p.m., Martin Callahan called the Coast Guard. Sector Key West launched a search. Aircraft, surface assets, the standard grid pattern. By dawn on October 10th, the search had covered 380 nautical miles of open water. What they found: 1 empty fuel can, a torn life jacket strap, debris floating consistent with a sinking vessel. The initial assessment was accidental sinking. Possible structural failure. Fuel fire. Catastrophic flooding. The kind of tragedy that rarely happens in offshore fishing. The debris pattern fit. The weather had been clean, but engines fail. Boats sink. It happened. That assessment was wrong. What actually happened on the morning of October 9th began at 8:48 a.m., 13 nautical miles south of Marathon, in international waters just inside the Cay Sal corridor. A vessel had been waiting there since before dawn. Not anchored. Drifting, running just enough power to hold position against the current. From a distance, it looked like a sport fishing boat taking a break. Up close, it was something else. A reflagged 64-foot motor yacht, hull number obscured, no legitimate registration visible. 5 men aboard, armed. The Real Promise passed the yacht at approximately 8:46 a.m. heading southwest. Standard route. Nothing unusual. 2 minutes later, the yacht came alongside at speed. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. The 5-man crew boarded the charter at gunpoint. Captain Whitmore and his first mate were restrained. The 6 clients, in the process of rigging rods for the first drop, were moved at gunpoint from the Real Promise to the Solara Venture. Personal items were taken. Phones were taken. The Real Promise's AIS transponder was disabled manually at 9:04 a.m. Someone aboard knew exactly where the unit was mounted. By 9:22 a.m., the Real Promise was taking on water. The seacocks had been opened from below. The charter boat sank in approximately 40 minutes, settling in 160 feet of water on the edge of the continental shelf. The debris Coast Guard found the next morning wasn't accident evidence. It was a cleanup. Captain Whitmore and his mate were put aboard a rigid inflatable and cut loose with a handheld VHF radio set to Channel 16. They were found by a passing recreational vessel at 2:17 p.m., 11 nautical miles northeast of the Scuttle Point. Both men were treated for dehydration and shock. Whitmore's account reached Coast Guard Sector Key West at 3:40 p.m. on October 9th. It was not immediately connected to the missing charter. The search command had already concluded the Real Promise was a sinking, not an abduction. The report from the recreational boat entered the system as a different type of incident. Mariners in distress, not a crime in progress. The gap between those two data streams wasn't closed until the following morning. 14 hours. That gap cost the investigation 14 hours. What strikes us about this case is how a 31-year safety record became a weapon against the people who trusted it. The Callahan operation was chosen because it was legitimate. A deep-water charter out of Marathon on a clear October morning looked like nothing at all. By the time the FBI's Miami field office had opened a full kidnap-for-ransom case file, the Solara Venture was already deep in the Cay Sal corridor, running without lights in Bahamian territorial waters. The 6 captives had been moved below deck, into a refrigerated hold originally designed for commercial catch storage. The space measured approximately 12 feet by 8 feet. It had a single locking door, a ventilation grate, temperature controllable from the deck above. The ransom demand arrived 60 hours after the abduction, on October 11th at 7:23 p.m. It came via encrypted email routed through a Caribbean satellite uplink, the kind used by commercial shipping and remote island operations throughout the region. The message went to one couple's family office attorney, a Naples-based estate lawyer. His name was in the email. His office address was in the email. His client relationship too. That specificity was the first anomaly. This was not a random hijacking. The perpetrators knew who was aboard. They knew the attorney's name, his relationship to the client, the structure of the family's holdings well enough to demand $4.2 million routed to a numbered offshore account in a jurisdiction with no U.S. extradition treaty. The demand came with a proof of life requirement, a specific phrase to repeat in a recorded message, sent as an audio file. 6 voices. All 6 alive. FBI negotiators at the Miami field office assessed the demand within 2 hours of receipt. The protocol, account structure, satellite routing, all of it suggested an operation with prior experience. This was not improvised. Someone had built this, tested it, run it before. The breakthrough came from where nobody expected. I spent time going through the investigative timeline in the case materials, and one detail kept pulling my attention back. The case didn't turn on satellite intercepts or drone sweeps or any of the high-tech assets USCG and FBI deployed. It turned on a fuel dock attendant at Stock Island, just east of Key West, who noticed something off. His name was Gerald Pham, 53 years old, 22 years working fuel docks in the Keys. He knew vessels. He knew consumption patterns the way a mechanic knows engine sounds, not from a manual, but from years of watching numbers add up. Starting on October 22nd, 13 days after the abduction, the same 64-foot motor yacht had pulled into the Stock Island fuel dock 3 nights running. Late each time, after 10 p.m., cash for premium diesel. The volume each night between 240 and 280 gallons. For a 64-foot vessel running recreational speeds and distances, that number was almost double what made sense. You fill that boat every few days, not every night. Not at those volumes. Not unless the engines were running hard all day and night. Pham flagged it to the dock supervisor. The dock supervisor, recognizing the yacht's approximate size and the timing, called the Coast Guard tip line on October 25th. The call was logged. It sat in a queue for 11 hours before an analyst at Sector Key West reviewed it against the active search parameters for the Real Promise case. When the analyst pulled the fuel dock log and cross-referenced the consumption figures against the search grid data, one detail emerged. The Mohawk's radar sweeps over the preceding 72 hours had logged a vessel signature consistent with a 64-foot displacement hull in the northern Cay Sal corridor. It appeared 3 times on passive radar, each in slightly different positions, always within a roughly 15 nautical mile box. Not transiting. Circling. Vessels transit. Vessels at anchor hold position. Vessels circling have a reason to stay where they are. The analyst flagged the file to the joint FBI-USCG command cell that had been running the Real Promise investigation out of the Key West federal complex. The connection was made at 11:40 p.m. on October 25th, day 16 of the hostage timeline. There is something about the way institutional systems process information that doesn't make the news. The tip from Gerald Pham was solid. The radar data checked out. The consumption anomaly was clear. But each entered a different system: the tip line, the search grid database, the fuel dock records. They did not speak to each other automatically. It took one analyst working a late shift, running a manual cross-check outside protocol, to put the 3 data streams in the same room. The case could have broken 24 hours earlier. It did not. By the time the command cell had a working target, it was 11:50 p.m. on October 25th. The Solara Venture's last radar position put it approximately 38 nautical miles northwest of Andros Island, drifting southwesterly at roughly 2 knots. At that drift rate, it would cross into deeper Bahamian territorial waters before dawn. The Mohawk was already at sea, running a modified search pattern southeast of the suspected position. It received the new grid coordinates at 12:19 a.m. on October 26th, day 17. Transit time to intercept, approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes at 20 knots. The FBI hurt element, 8 operators, inserted by fast boat from a staging platform 12 nautical miles east of target, launched from Opelika Executive Airport at 1:17 a.m. They reached the staging platform at 2:50 a.m. Most people assume finding the target is the hard part. It wasn't. Finding the Solara Venture took 17 days. Closing the distance without alerting the crew in international waters with 6 captives below deck where a panicked response could be catastrophic, that took different precision. The operational problem was straightforward to describe and extremely difficult to execute. The yacht had a 5-man armed crew, likely operating in watch rotations. The captives were in a locked refrigerated hold below the aft deck. One access point. One ventilation grate. No external visibility. A perimeter approach in daylight was impossible. A night approach required total emissions control. No radar, no radio, no navigation lights, no engine noise above ambient sea sound. At 2:48 a.m., the Mohawk went to full emissions control. Its captain, Commander Sonia Reyes, brought the cutter to 7 knots on a parallel heading, holding 2,000 meters off the yacht's starboard beam. 2 rigid inflatables launched from the Mohawk's stern at 3:22 a.m., carrying 6 operators split between them. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. The approach plan called for a simultaneous 3-point entry, 2 operators at the swim platform, 2 at the forward anchor chain, 2 at the bridge deck via the port rail. All 3 entry points to be reached and secured within 90 seconds of first contact. Against 5 armed crew, in darkness, on a vessel capable of 18 knots, that 90-second window was razor thin. What exposed the plan was a single variable, the yacht's radar. The Solara Venture was running a commercial marine radar unit. If any crew member on watch was actively monitoring it, the approach of 2 fast inflatables inside 500 meters would register. The HRT element would lose the element of surprise. In that confined space below the aft deck, with 6 captives and 1 locked door, losing surprise meant losing everything. The solution was the Mohawk itself. At 3:51 a.m., Commander Reyes brought the cutter to full running lights and went active on Channel 16, broadcasting a standard USCG safety patrol hail. Like shining a flashlight in someone's face. The Solara Venture's crew, if watching radar, would now see a large Coast Guard vessel bearing down from the northeast. Attention locked on the Mohawk. Not the water to the southwest. The inflatables hit the hull at 4:13 a.m. 4:14 a.m. The Mohawk's distraction hail was still broadcasting. The first 2 HRT operators cleared the swim platform in 11 seconds. The forward team reached the anchor chain at 4:14 a.m. plus 20 seconds. The bridge deck element came over the port rail at 4:14 a.m. plus 41 seconds. The 5-man crew was taken without a shot fired. 2 were on deck. 1 at the helm, 1 aft. 3 below in crew quarters, 2 of them asleep. All 5 were in flex cuffs within 4 minutes of first contact. No weapons discharged. No injuries to operators. 1 crew member, reached in the engine room, got a laceration on his forearm during restraint. Treated on scene, documented for evidence chain. The aft hold was the next problem. The door to the refrigerated hold was a watertight commercial unit with toggle latch and padlock. The kind installed on fishing vessels for catch, not passengers. The padlock key was found on the crew member who had been at the helm station. HRT reached the hold door at 4:19 a.m. The padlock came off at 4:21 a.m. What the operators found inside was documented in clinical language in the NCA's intake log. The space was cold, approximately 43 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 individuals, all adult, all alive. All ambulatory, though with difficulty. They had been in the space for 17 days. CIS documented the scene. Coast Guard medics moved the 6 to the Mohawk's medical bay within 9 minutes of the hold being opened. The Mohawk's physician assistant, working with 2 emergency medical technicians, conducted immediate assessments. All 6 were transferred by Coast Guard helicopter to Baptist Health, South Florida, on October 26th. Hospital records described findings consistent with 17 days in cold confinement. Dehydration. Hypothermia recovery protocols. Vascular issues in 4 victims' legs. All 6 required 11 days of inpatient observation before discharge. The Solara Venture was taken under tow by the Mohawk at 5:07 a.m. NINCIS and FBI evidence technicians worked the vessel in motion, preserving chain of custody across the entire hull. At boarding, the yacht had approximately 180 gallons of premium diesel remaining. At the consumption rate Gerald Pham had flagged at Stock Island, that represented roughly 18 to 24 hours of operational range. The intercept had not been arbitrary. Another day, and the systems wouldn't have connected. Another night, and the yacht would have been beyond reach. 5 crew members were arrested on the Solara venture. Their identities are part of an ongoing federal prosecution. Public record shows all 5 were charged with federal kidnapping under 18 USC Section 1201. Additional charges included maritime piracy under 18 USC Section 1981, conspiracy to commit extortion, and use of a firearm in furtherance of a federal crime of violence. All 5 were held without bail at arraignment in the Southern District of Florida on October 29, 2025. The 6th member of the operation, the one who was not on the yacht, was arrested 3 days later. In Coral Gables. His name, as established in the public record, was Marcus Del Rey Fontaine, 41 years old, a licensed yacht broker operating out of a commercial marina in Coconut Grove. No criminal record. Paid his taxes. Had a website with testimonials and a LinkedIn showing 11 years in yacht sales. He also had access to the membership directory of a yacht club in Naples, Florida, a private social club with approximately 400 member families. Among them, high net worth retired couples whose finances, investments, and family office structures were knowable to anyone willing to cross-reference club records with Sarasota and Collier County property filings and Florida probate court records, all of which are public documents. Fontaine had spent approximately 8 months profiling potential targets. Couples with the right finances, recreational patterns, and charter habits for a ransom operation. The 6 victims weren't random. They were selected from a short list. Their attorney was named in the ransom email because Fontaine had identified him through estate filing records as the relevant financial contact. The connection between Fontaine and the operational crew aboard the Solara venture was traced through encrypted communications recovered during the yacht boarding. A satellite messaging unit linking Fontaine to the crew's coordinator. The device's memory had not been wiped. That was the operational security failure that brought him down. FBI surveillance teams established a physical on Fontaine at his Coconut Grove office on October 28th. The Southern District of Florida issued an arrest warrant. Fontaine was taken into custody at his residence in Coral Gables at 6:19 a.m. on October 29, 2025. Charged with conspiracy to kidnap, wire extortion, and maritime piracy. This take will probably generate disagreement. Fontaine's sentence, under federal guidelines, will likely be significantly shorter than the 5 men's. His role was architect and logistics. Their role was operational. In federal conspiracy law, the distinction matters at sentencing. Whether it should matter this much, given that nothing happens without Fontaine's profiling, the attorney's name, the target list, that is a question the court will eventually answer in the sentencing documents, not the charging ones. The broader question this case raises isn't about Fontaine specifically. It's about the information infrastructure he exploited. Yacht club directories, property records, probate filings, family office structures reconstructible from public documents. None of that is individual failure. That's how civic record-keeping works. The gap between public records availability and targeting potential is real. This case isn't the first time it's been exploited. Federal investigators working the financial side traced the $4.2 million ransom demand to a numbered account structure running through 3 jurisdictions: Cayman Islands Holding Company, Panamanian Intermediary, and an end account in a no-treaty jurisdiction. The ransom was never paid. The FBI stalled from the start, maintaining the appearance of a family process, but never authorizing transfer. But the account structure existed. It was operational. The Cayman and Panamanian nodes have been identified and are under ongoing asset forfeiture proceedings. The end account and whatever it holds are beyond current U.S. legal reach. That account structure had received funds before. The financial investigator's assessment, included in the unsealed portions of the federal indictment, notes transaction patterns in the end account that predate the Real Promise operation by at least 14 months. How many prior operations? What were they? Where did funds come from? Unanswered in any public filing. Was that 14-hour gap a procedural failure that nearly cost 6 lives? Or an acceptable limitation of disparate response channels? The question sits in the record, unanswered. A separate line of inquiry, opened by the NSIS evidence team working the Solara venture, concerns the yacht's prior movements. The yacht's hull log, recovered before it was wiped via forensic partition, showed 3 prior extended deployments in the Cay Sal corridor over 22 months. Dates, durations, positions. On 2 of those deployments, the consumption logs showed the same anomalous fuel burn pattern that Gerald Pham flagged at Stock Island. What were those deployments? Are there other victims? Has this crew been tied to prior missing persons cases in the Florida-Bahamas corridor? All open questions. The federal prosecution of the 5 on-scene crew members and Fontaine moved quickly by maritime case standards. Arraignment on October 29th. December 3rd brought a superseding indictment with additional charges related to the yacht's prior deployments, as investigators developed that thread. All 6 defendants remained in federal custody. Trial is scheduled for March 2026 in the Southern District of Florida, Miami Division. The case is United States versus Fontaine, et al. The 6 victims, recovered from the Mohawk on October 26th, transferred to Baptist Health South Florida, discharged after 11 days, are cooperating witnesses. Their identities have not been disclosed in public filings. Their attorney, the Naples estate lawyer named in the ransom email, provided a statement to federal prosecutors. He has not spoken publicly. Martin Callahan, the owner of the Real Promise charter operation, gave a brief statement to local media in Marathon in early November 2025. He said the Real Promise was his family's livelihood for 31 years. He said Captain Whitmore was the finest captain he ever worked with. He didn't know what else to say. Captain Whitmore has not returned to offshore charter work since the incident. His current status is not part of any public record. The strangest part of this case is how its failures and breaks balanced each other. The 14-hour intake gap that nearly buried the initial abduction report. The 11-hour queue delay that held Gerald Pham's fuel dock tip. The satellite messaging unit the Solara Ventures crew didn't wipe. The radar distraction that gave the HRT element 90 seconds of cover. Each failure, each break, balanced the other across 17 days. The margin was thinner than any formal after-action report acknowledges. What this tells us about maritime security in the Florida to Bahamas corridor, the official record understates. The Cay Sal Bank area, shallow water banks and deep water cuts between the Florida Keys and northwestern Bahamas, has historically been a transshipment zone for narcotics, fuel, and migrants. It is patrolled, but it is vast. A vessel without transponders can operate for 17 days before a fuel dock tip and an analyst's cross-check bring it into view. It's not a knock on the Coast Guard. The Mohawk, Reyes's plan, the HRT execution were all professional and effective once the target was found. The vulnerability is upstream, the gap between tip lines, search databases, and field intelligence. They're built independently and need manual bridging. Gerald Pham, the fuel dock technician at Stock Island, wasn't thanked in any press statement. His tip didn't make the FBI's public summary. NCIS logs called him Source Contact Kilo 7. He called because the numbers didn't add up. 22 years on a fuel dock. That was all it took. Put yourself in the position of the analyst who pulled that tip from the queue at 11:40 p.m. on October 25th, 11 hours after it came in. Working a late shift. Running a manual cross-check outside protocol. Not knowing what it would find. One more queue item on a shift already run long. The decision to pull it took approximately 4 seconds. The boarding decision, made before the yacht reached deeper Bahamian waters, hinged on that 4-second choice and FAM's 22 years of fuel consumption knowledge. The Solara Venture was transferred to federal custody at Miami Marine Patrol on October 28, 2025. It remains under asset forfeiture seizure. 2 prior deployments, identified in the hull log, are under joint NCIS-FBI investigation. No charges have been filed in connection with those deployments. No additional victims have been publicly identified. The ransom account structure in the Cayman Islands and Panama has been the subject of mutual legal assistance requests since November 2025. The end account and whatever it holds remain unseized. The operator of that financial structure has not been charged. His office files held a target list of 37 names beyond the 6 from the Real Promise, all identified through the same public records process. Those 37 people have been notified by the FBI. They've been told, in standard FBI language, that their information was held by someone charged with conspiracy to kidnap. None were harmed. None know if anyone else has that same information. Will it happen again in the Cay Sal corridor? The Gulf? Any open water charter zone where public records and patterns create targeting surface? The operational blueprint exists. The financial infrastructure existed before this case, and in part still does. The data gap that cost 14 hours, then 11 more, is systemic, not resolved. The Real Promise sits in 160 feet of water on the edge of the continental shelf, southwest of Marathon. Located by NCIS sonar. Documented as a crime scene. Never raised. The seafloor at that depth preserves what it takes in, slowly and without ceremony. 6 people went aboard that boat on a clear October morning for a day of fishing. They were returned to their families after 17 days. The water where the Real Promise sank is still there. The systems that let 17 days pass before the intercept are still there. The account, never funded, always ready to receive, is still there. The operation is dismantled. The corridor it ran through is not.